Welcome to episode 7 of the Scale Model Podcast. My name is Stuart Clark. In this podcast, I aim to entertain, inform, and hopefully promote the hobby of scale model kit building with interviews, reviews, and news about the scale model hobby. You may notice the record quality is sounding a little bit different. I'm here at the London Public Library Labs in London, Ontario. This is my hometown, and part of the labs now include a podcast studio. So I'm just here playing on some of the new equipment, seeing what we can do and what sort of sound quality we're getting. So far, it's sounding very, very good. I'm liking the quality in general. There may be a few tweaks we're going to do, but we're going to continue and try and get some of the recordings done here at times. Lots more announcements this week, and we're also playing a little bit of catch-up from previous weeks with various companies announcing new things. Atalery in early October announced some of their releases, aircraft, cars, tanks, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. They featured a 112 scale, I should say, a Fiat Abarth Assetto Corsa. This was a car, was called the Nuvo 500, was produced by Fiat from 1957 to 1975. Quite an iconic car, to say made in Italy. It was famous all over the world. So very nice car here in several racing configurations and stuff like that. So it looks like a fairly good build if you're into that sort of stuff. Featuring opening hood and trunk, closed or open top, opening car's doors, steerable wheels, and a working suspension, of course. 2 sets of tires, thick and thinner for the sports version. And it also includes some painting mass, some photo etch, and it builds up to quite a nice looking vehicle. Almost reminds me of the German version or the Italian version of a Volkswagen. Also being released, they're releasing a 148 scale B-25B Mitchell bomber from World War II. 33 centimeters in dimensions, so good size there. They're including a gunship model, several different versions, 4 in total, with some nice looking box art and nose art, including some ordnance, stuff like that. Looks like well-molded sprues. Also, because of the slightly different version, looks like you have your choice of some different canopies or cockpit clear parts and stuff like that. So another well-looking kit. If you're a truck guy, they've got the Scania T143H in 124 scale. Looks like a nice-looking truck there with a very attractive-looking artwork with decaling on the sides of it. 2 different decals. One's a little bit more plainer. The other one has this absolutely gorgeous-looking bird. From Scania, looks like one of their demo models. Again, quite a large kit, a lot of good sprues, a lot of extra parts, stuff like that. They also have a Ford Escort RS 1800 Mark II from the Lombard RAC Rally in 124th. I know this is something the rally guys, fans will probably like. So this one dates from the mid-70s. And they have it set up in a very nice scheme for the World Rally Championship. Very nice looking aircraft. I have my mind on aircraft today. Very nice looking rally car. Moving on to aircraft, we do have the JU-86 E1 or E2 model in 176 scale from Atalery. This was a 1930s German aircraft, originally developed from a passenger postal transport, but they could easily convert it into a military version. So yeah, pre-war. Bunch of different schemes, quite a few actually. I think they've got a total of 6 different schemes, 6 or 7, with all the decal markings and stuff like that. This was used in the Spanish Civil War. So yeah, very nice thing. It actually did participate briefly in the Polish campaign in '39, but it was soon replaced. It was also used by the Swedish and Hungarian air forces. Next out from them is a 172nd scale US M60. This was the tank during the 60s the US produced all the way until 1983, over 15,000 produced. Nice looking kit with a bunch of decal options in 72nd scale. So yeah, fairly straightforward. Plastic tracks, several pieces. You don't have to assemble them individually, so that's very nice. Okay, moving on to AK Interactive. What do they have this month? Some new paint sets, new colors for some nice stuff for some of the World War II aircraft, and a book about what we call their tune models. These are the little tiny planes, ships, armor, and even some figures that are kind of a comic style, kind of an egg models. You may have heard of them originally. Now they're calling them tune, I guess. They're getting more and more popular. I remember getting the egg planes years ago, but now they've got all sorts of different things, from rally cars to things like that. So they've released a very nice book, which includes, as normal for AK, a full-on, full-color pictures with how-tos, how to do things like that. So very nice looking kit. Then we have a glass fiber pencil. AK is introducing. These are really good for getting precision sanding work done. You can really get in a tight area, and with the grit in that, it really makes quick work of getting those little imperfections out and stuff like that. Also good with some brass and things like that. So yeah, overall, and of course, as I said, they've got a bunch of new paint sets out, Soviet aircraft colors from 1917 to 41, Luftwaffe colors in 1990s to the 2000s, also 60s and 70s Luftwaffe colors, so quite a few. As well, they've got World War II U.S. Army Air Force colors, Volume 2, so some additional colors there for like your P-51Ds and things like that. So pretty straightforward. Also, just looking down the catalog list here, they've got an early Israeli Air Force color paint set. As we said, World War II, they've, obviously the Volume 1, they've got that. So they have quite a bit. It's well worth checking out some of these paint sets because, it's everything you need, basically. And there's a ton more. So we'll check that out in the link as well. Also a reissue. This is a classic monogram kit. Those of us of a certain age will remember these. Rommel's Rod. This was a hot rod done by a guy named Tom Daniels back in the 60s and 70s. It's basically, you take a half track, you take a Mercedes-Benz staff car, and you smush them together, and you end up with this. This is a kind of cool little thing they had years ago, various monster cars and stuff like that. So it's been reissued by Revell Monogram. Most dealers now have it. I've just linked to one here, Monsters in Motion. They have it in stock right now for $21.99 US. As I say, it's a reissue. So this is one that used to be really hard to find. Whether you build World War II armor or vehicles or whatever, you might find this one amusing. So definitely check that one out. Moving on to some aircraft. We've been talking about large-scale aircraft, namely the 132nd scale Lancasters and things like that. Well, there's a company now, Models VIT. They want to make, and they're asking people if they would buy it, they want to make an Antonov AN-225 Mira in 1/72nd scale. Now, for those of you that don't know what the Mira is, I suggest you look it up, AN-225 Mira, M-R-I-Y-A. This is a monster transport plane with the emphasis on monster. It was originally designed to carry the Russian space shuttle. This beast has 6 engines, a lot of landing gear, and a lot of capacity. I've actually seen a couple of them live. They used to come in to pick up railway engines to take from a GM diesel here in London, Ontario, and they take them to Ireland and things like that. I believe there's a Ukrainian company now that has most of them, and these guys specialize in very heavy width. So yeah, this thing's going to be absolutely huge. So definitely worth checking out. If it's something you want to support, maybe let them know and say, hey, I'll buy one. I have an extra garage, extra floor in the house that I can put this thing in. So definitely check that out. Also moving on, if we talk about, again, big scale aircraft, there's a company called Airscale in the UK. They specialize in aftermarket detail sets, interior detail sets, things like that. They are for Telford Scale Model World, which is coming up on the 10th and 11th of November in England. They are releasing a brand new Lancaster cockpit detail set, and this is for the Hong Kong models Mark 1B model in 1/32nd scale. They have some pictures on their Facebook page. Well worth checking it out. I've linked to the original announcement, and then you can check out on the Facebook page some of the other details that they have there. Definitely worth checking out. Last but not least, let's talk about our friends at Tamiya. They've got, again, some new items coming out for November. A lot of RC stuff is allless. What we tend to look at is some of the scale model stuff. We talked briefly before about the Panther and the Panzer IV Special Edition. Looks like they're coming out with a Su-85 and an Su-122 tank destroyer. So this looks quite good. I don't know if it's a reissue or not. I'm going to have to do some more reading. But they're reintroducing those two in particular. There's also a KV-1B with the angled armor. So it looks nice looking. So if you're a fan of Russian armor, Tamiya's got 3 new things for you this month. In addition, as we said before, they've released their lacquer paint retarder. They've got some other tools, things like that. So well worth checking out from our friends at Tamiya. Moving on, we're going to see what else is being talked about on the scalemates.com in the hot kit section. I'm just looking through here. The Lancaster, obviously, is still being, from Wingnut Wings, is still being heavily discussed. The Amusing Hobby and the TACOM, the Cranes, the Strabocran. I'm probably slaughtering that completely. Someone correct me. Both of theirs are being discussed, obviously. AVF Club's 148 scale U2s, both the U2 and the U2 Dragon Lady. Again, those are going to be absolutely monsters. I also see Model Collect has announced a Lockheed A12. So this is a variation on the Blackbird in 1/72nd scale. This is a 2019 release, and we'll see if we can find more information like that. Always so much different and new things being introduced. So, well, we're checking out there. And that is our hot news items for this week. Well, our interview today on the Scale Model Podcast is with a modeler I found about a year ago when searching for blogs, and I've really enjoyed reading about his work. His name is Jon Bius. He lives in Hope Mills, North Carolina. He works as a web developer, a career he's been in since 1998. Prior to that, he did serve with the Army, U.S. Army, as a PSYOPs unit in Fort Bragg, Carolina, North Carolina, I should say. He is married with 2 adult children. You can find his blog at jonbius.com, and he also has a Facebook presence at Jon Bius Scale Modelers as well. Jon, welcome to the Scale Model Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here.
Well, like I said, it's honored. We know it's an honor for us that you're able to join us today. And as I was saying at the intro, I really enjoy the work you write. And my goodness, you write a lot about the hobby. How long have you been in the hobby?
Well, like a lot of guys our age, 50-ish. Mm-hmm. I started when I was a kid, and about the time I discovered cars and girls and guitars and girls and basketball and girls.
Yes.
I kind of dropped out of it. About 2006, I got back into it. My wife actually encouraged me to do it because we would go to Barnes & Noble to get coffee.
Right.
And I would sit and read model magazines, and she said, "Why don't you build some of them?" And I said, I haven't built these for 25 years. For my birthday that year, in February 2006, she got me monogram P51 Mustang, the 48 scale kit.
Excellent.
And a couple of paints. And I thought, I'll build this and see if I enjoy it. And here we are 12 plus years later, and I'm still doing it. So it hooked me and hooked me good.
Well, and that's good. And, you know, for my spouse as well, my wife, she knits and stuff like that. And I was kind of a similar path. I was actually starting to build models before I met her again, and yeah, she's been very supportive as well. And as we like to joke, at least we know where each other are. So when we're working away, so that's always good. So what made you decide to start actually, you know, getting out there with a web presence, moving beyond the building, and actually start writing about some of the tips and other content you're doing?
I've always enjoyed writing. It's just been something I've I've done ever since I was a child. Never professionally. I just started enjoying it. When I got back into modeling, I actually started a Christian-based website called agapemodels.com and started publishing on that in around 2007. And that was going well and fine, but I started wanting to do more of my own personal stuff. That one was focused on mostly the finished models.
Right.
So I wanted to do more writing. I wanted to talk about the logic of the things I did and the process of the things I did and the things I discovered. And so I just sort of started writing about it and putting it out there, and more people started looking at it, and I'd write more stuff and people would look at it. And before long, it really started growing, and it kind of surprised me because part of the reason I do the writing is I've never done YouTube, and that seems to be where everything's going. And I thought, well, nobody's really going to read my stuff, but I enjoy writing so much, I'll do it.
Right.
And I've been surprised at the number of people who actually enjoy reading a model article. So it was as much to share the joy, the fun of the hobby, and to encourage people that, hey, if this monkey John can do it, anybody can do it. It was as much to share that as just to share my love of writing. I love writing.
Right. And I really see that. As I said, as I was telling you pre-show, you had a recent post up about a fairy firefly, and the meat of the article is about fading a 2-color camo scheme, but you nicely integrate it into a story about when you were first, because you're tall, and they just naturally assumed you were a basketball star, and it was a great story, and it nicely.
Well, thank you.
It nicely integrates, and I think you're right. I think that's what people look for. They look, now that we have the internet and these other technologies, your local community doesn't just have to be, if you're lucky enough to have an IPMS chapter in your hometown or in your area, but it can truly be worldwide. And that's one thing I've noticed too. I've been writing, doing a little bit of YouTube work, but then I also realized, there's a certain thing about a podcast too. I enjoy listening to podcasts when I'm building, so I thought, why not a model building podcast? So it's just another segment, and there's no absolute right or wrong things to do, and that's what makes it absolutely awesome about this hobby we have. So let's go into some of the meat of the actual hobby part. What's your favorite part of the build? And like you basically build. You're a bit like me. You build everything. A little bit of Gundam, a little bit of Games Workshop, which I haven't really gone into yet. I've got a few figures, but I'm always fascinated with. But you build all sorts of things. If I just look at your website, it's a vast collection. So what really is your favorite part when you're actually building a kit? And then, of course, I'm going to ask what your least favorite part is.
Yeah, I think the easiest way I can answer that is to tell you my least favorite part first.
Okay.
Which is decals.
Right.
I can do them. I know how to do them. I don't have problems with them. I don't like them, just because it's kind of boring to me. Everything else in a build, I really enjoy. I mean, when it's the planning stage of a build, I enjoy going through the instructions and trying to decide what I'm going to do. I may spend a week as I'm working on other things rehearsing a build in my head. I somewhat obsess over it.
Right.
Then when it gets to the building, if it's an aircraft or a spaceship, painting the interior, I really enjoy that. When it comes to assembling and filling the seams and doing all of that stuff, I like that. I mean, if I had to nail down one favorite part, it would probably be weathering, because I think that's when you take something that looks kind of toy-like and it still looks like a model, and you get the chance to actually interpret real life.
Right.
And I don't know, maybe other people do this, but like when I'm weathering, one of the things I love about it is if I'm putting a stain on a panel, I actually like to imagine, how did that get there? Because I can relate it to my military experience. I remember we'd be servicing vehicles and you'd spill something on them, or there'll be a scratch on it, so you'd get a can of Krylon spray paint and paint over it or something. And so of all the parts, the weathering is probably my favorite because it's ripe for imagination. It's hard to in my mind, it's hard to beat that part.
Right, right, and I think I think a lot of people would share it. I feel the same way about decals on certain kits, particularly modern military aircraft subjects that have so much stenciling. I'm a big RAF guy, and I really like that new RAF F4 Phantom they have for the Royal Navy. But then I look at all the stencils on that, and it's like, yeah,
yeah. There's times with like whether it's World War II, especially modern aircraft, where I leave off 75% of the stencils. I mean, I get to a point where I kind of plaster them around the airframe, and I go, that's enough. I'm bored. I'm moving on.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's one thing I'm a great believer in the 3-foot rule for, how does it look from 3 feet away? And that's generally even, I've been working on cockpits and that sometimes where I used to really enjoy photo etch, and it can burn you out. And that's what's nice about having all the different subjects. As I say, I've been really, the Games Workshop stuff and the sci-fi is stuff that really I'm going to start looking at next, because sometimes, as you say, you just get kind of burnt out about trying to do something, a real world environment. It's nice just to do basically a what if. So yeah, that works very, very well.
Yeah, you mentioned being burnt out. If you would have looked at my blog just 2.5 years ago, all you would have seen, anything I did on the web, all you would have seen were World War II aircraft. Right. And because and at the time I enjoyed it, but somewhere along the way, between a heavy build schedule, I was really into commission builds. It began to burn me out, and I started adding a few jets. That didn't do it. I was actually, this time last year, well, a little earlier than this time last year, probably August of 2017, I was about ready to sell my stuff and walk away from the hobby.
Wow.
And I found a guy building a Gundam online on YouTube, a guy that goes by Model Making Guru.
Yes.
And it intrigued me. And I started building Gundam, and it just brought fun back into everything. And then all of a sudden, I said, let me try this Warhammer thing, and let me try sci-fi. And now I'm so much happier because of that mix of things.
Exactly.
Next year, I haven't ever had an inclination to build cars. I just never have. But I thought, you know what? Next year I'm going to build a car, and I'm going to blog the process just to see, okay, what's it like to build your first car? And
I think it's something. I know I've encouraged people in the past. We actually had a couple of people in our club. We've got a guy in our local IPMS chapter who's just unbelievable with his aircraft build, particularly U.S. Navy modern. And someone challenged him, build some armor. And he decided to rise up to it. He got himself a 135th Abrams and did an amazing job and really enjoyed it. And I've kind of followed the same path. I have a bunch of the old 40-year-old Tamiya kits. They don't have 135th armor. They don't have to be perfectly accurate, but they'll do. And yeah, I'm really enjoying the whole weathering process and doing that again. So yeah, I always tell people, I've done two cars now actually, including one I call a Franken Porsche. I'll explain that later. Apparently there's certain steps you can't, if you have to follow the build order, or else it gets awkward. I'll just leave it at that. I had to chop off a nose to put headlights in, basically.
I can see that would be a little difficult.
Yeah, a little bit challenging, but no, exactly. Like if I look at my stash, I still have a lot of aircraft, but yeah, quite a bit of armor, a little bit of sci-fi, and yeah, it's just fun, as you say, when you do some of the, again, going back to some of your latest Games Workshop builds. It's just fun to do a totally what-if build. You can do it the way you want. I've never been one to, I don't worry about the rivet counters because I build for me, but it's nice, yeah, as you say, in the end, it's absolutely just a hobby. And it's an important part to see. I also noticed I went back quite a way back in both your websites, and you actually have interviewed manufacturers in the past. Now I'm going way back. I found a couple. So again, and that's one thing I'm getting out to. I'm talking to some of them too. What challenges do you see for both them and maybe the hobby in general over the next few years?
I don't know if you saw, I did on my JonBius.com site. I did a survey back in 2015.
Okay.
That was asking modelers. It was kind of aircraft skewed, but I had nearly 600 people respond to it.
Excellent.
And it was asking, how many models do you build? It was all about preferences. And one of the things I saw is that the average modeler that answered that survey, now it was a very Western centric. I'll say, it was aircraft, armor, ships, cars, very Western centric. But the age of those modelers, for the majority of them, was over 40, and a huge chunk of it was over 50.
I'm just looking at that. I just pulled that up on the site here. Yeah. Holy
and if
cow.
And then if you look a little further, it shows that in that survey, and I had to tease the math out a little bit, but in that survey, it showed that the majority of modelers had only built about 5 models in the past year, but they owned 183.
Yeah, exactly.
And what my concern is for the future of the hobby, based on that survey and talking with manufacturers, and I've been blessed just to know some manufacturers as friends over the years, that in terms of traditional model making, your aircraft, your armor, that kind of thing, the majority of people who are buying those are going to be dead in 25 years.
Yes, absolutely.
And
agree.
You can say that there are efforts being made to bring in young people, and there are young people getting into it in those more traditional genres. But the fact is, from a manufacturing standpoint, I used to work in newspapers.
Right.
And there's going to be a point where there's not going to be any more print newspapers, not because there's not any subscribers, but it's not going to be worth it to the paper companies to manufacture the paper.
Exactly.
And I think if traditional model makers don't change their focus, where modeling is going now is going to leave them behind. Because in this transition I made to opening up in genres, one of the things that shocked me was to find out that this company called Bandai, which I heard before, I had thought, okay, they just make these kids snap together things that aren't real models.
Right.
I did some reading of their annual business reports, their annual statements. They've averaged 12 million Gundam kits per year for the last 30 years.
Yep.
12 million a year. Their annual sales of just Gundam kits, more properly Gunpla kits, if people care about the distinction, it runs into numbers that I would have to guess, knowing the little bit I know from inside information, and I say that a little tongue-in-cheek, but with some seriousness, they sell kits in a year that dwarf everybody else combined.
Yeah.
And the fact that Bandai just bought out their distributor here in the U.S., Bluefin, says the U.S. market is growing.
And I think
so there is a future to modeling.
Yep.
But what's going to kill the Airfixes and the Edwards and maybe even the Tamiyas, maybe not the Tamiyas and the Hasegawas because they've got a strong national market. But here in the West, if they don't change their focus, us old guys are going to quit buying models. I mean, I already deal with arthritis. I know that I've got a limited time before my fingers are just going to go, no, we're not going to do that anymore.
Right. And I think you speak to two different but also linked subjects. We've got a fact of we do have a traditional base who tend to be older. It's certainly not as many young people start the hobby now. I do notice, again, just from noticing in my area in southwestern Ontario, the Toronto through Detroit area, we do have a lot of people, as you say, either getting back into it or discovering it once they're in their late 30s, early 40s. So you're not going to be able to compete with the video games. We do have some young modelers in our group, for example, and our juniors categories at the various shows are well filled. But yeah, what they're building is something different. They're not building the stuff they remembered watching on TV or their parents or their grandparents flew, drove, or sailed. And so that is a big role. So that's exactly, traditional kit manufacturers have to realize that, there is more subjects eventually. And as you say, there may be less need for that. I wonder in terms of, we may see as we go older and older, we've seen a resurgence in World War One kits, thanks to one manufacturer in particular. But again, very limited in scope, very limited market. And as you say, the Far East market, and I think that's also something to be said about the growth of the middle class there. People have the time, have the money. I've known for years, particularly in Japan, and they've got a huge fan base for the Gundams, the sci-fi, the stuff like that, and the stuff they're continuing to come out with. And I think we really saw that because, for example, I remember for a few years you couldn't get a Bandai Star Wars kit in North America. You had to settle for the Revell, and people were smuggling them in, or eBay, or whatever. So I think the market's growing with that as well. But I agree, the manufacturers have to realize the market's changing a lot, and I think in a lot of cases, as the younger people grow up, you're not going to see, just like in other areas, you're not going to see people with giant stashes. I often talk about where baby boomers' parents are passing away or downsizing, the kids don't want the dish sets or the silver or stuff like that. And because they don't have the room, and they don't seem to have that, I wouldn't call it the hoarding mentality, but the large stash collection mentality. It's something I've been thinking about doing a survey anyway, so I'm glad you mentioned this one, because this is going to be some interesting reading. I might look at revisiting some of this at some point, in terms of where the hobby is going. And I think you're going to see a lot of cases where, you're not going to see the larger stashes, because the market's so depressed now. As people pass away, there's literally some of these guys have thousands of kits. And
I was talking with a friend of mine, who he was visiting a friend of his, who's an older gentleman apparently, and the guy has thousands of kits sitting in his garage, and he's at the point now. He says, "Look, I just want you to come in and get them out. Just get them out. Do what you want with them. I don't care. I don't want to have to pass these along to the kids." I kind of saw that in my own life. I had gotten a stash up to, and a lot of people who have a lot of kits will laugh at this, but I had about 300 kits, which really isn't that many when you really start talking to hardcore, modelers.
Exactly.
And I said, this is a waste of my money to have these sitting in here. So I took them to a model show and sold it. I've sold my stash. In fact, before the show, I went in and counted it. I've got 50 kits now.
Right.
Of which maybe a third of those are now my new interest in Gundam and sci-fi. And I pretty much, if I buy it, I build it.
Right. Right.
And because I sell everything I build, I've started treating it more like a business in terms of dollars. That okay, if I'm gonna buy the inventory, I have to sell the inventory.
Right.
But yeah, the collecting mentality is going away, I think. But hitting on another aspect of the subject, not only the manufacturers, but I was involved fairly heavily here in our local IPMS chapter.
Right.
For several years, served in various positions, helped head up some of the shows and things like that. I'm no longer really involved in it, but one of the things I've seen here locally in this region is, while a show may be well attended, those younger modelers that are out there, they're not showing up in great numbers. For instance, I went to a show last fall near here, in 2017, after I had just gotten an interest in Gundam. And so I immediately went out and looked for, okay, I want to see the Gundam models. And there's hundreds of models out on tables. There were 3 Gundam. And there were 2 young millennial guys standing there. They had entered them. They had heard about this model show. They wanted to come see what it was about. And they were really enthusiastic about the hobby and excited about the hobby. And they were just kind of, I mean, nobody was rude to them, certainly, but they were just treated like, well, there's this little table for your whatever those things are.
I've seen exactly the same thing up here.
And what happens is, in my mind, I'm thinking these guys are the future of the hobby.
Yes. Especially
in terms of IPMS activities. And then, so I got in touch with them because I talked with them and I got in touch with them and I found out they've started their own kind of model club, and it meets with great frequency and has great attendance.
Yep.
And people are buying stuff. I mean, it's all the things that manufacturers like to hear about model clubs.
Yep.
And I asked them, I said, you know, what do you guys want to know? And one of the things they said was, we want to know techniques. We want to learn. We saw what all these old guys were doing and said, how do they do that? So there's this great desire for, hey, how do we do this? Not that there's not people in that genre who can't fill it, but the typical IPMS member, the typical older modeler, has a vast array of knowledge that others would love to have. And I guess in a way that kind of drives me in my own work, because, I did one time an article on water slide decals. And the whole reason I did it was because I had forgotten to get the actual article photographed.
Right.
And so I had these photos of putting on some decals, and I thought, all right, let me see if I can squeeze an entire article out of this thing. It has become one of my best trafficked articles.
Awesome.
And it's just, you cut them out, you dip them in water, you stick them on the model. I mean, I managed to squeeze 2,000 words of nonsense out of that.
Yep.
And so it's a twofold issue. The manufacturers are going to have to go where the modelers are, and then the ancillary support system around it, IPMS and other clubs like that, are going to have to start recognizing that not everybody cares about, is there going to be a category split in 148 scale single engine axis fighters?
Yeah, exactly. Bingo. And I think your experience very closely matches mine. I remember.
Then we must be right.
Oh yeah, well we must be right. Two of us, right? I guess we better check with our wives first just to make sure. But because they are the true arbiters and final decision makers. Right. God bless both of them. What you were talking about there is I remember at some of our local shows we have a show every 2 years. Here it used to. It's called the Southwestern Ontario Scale Model Show. We just wrapped it up last month, and I remember a few years ago exactly that. We weren't seeing that. There was great debate about, should we be including Games Workshop figures? Should we be including lead figures? And in the end, we did, and a lot of it was because of some people who were either younger in the club or some people like myself who kind of see, we've seen the writing on the wall. You need to encourage it, and a lot of the times the technique's the same. And you were talking about different groups, and I've noticed that because I know here in the area we have some stores which are more game stores. So, Dungeons and Dragons and Flames of War and that, but they sell the Gundams, they sell the Mr. Hobby stuff, they sell the specialty stuff, and the communities are building there. So, at least in our local chapter, I'm pleased to see we do have some Gundam model builders now, and we're getting that more and more. And I did notice on the tables this year we had quite a few, so I was really pleased. So I think
that's good to hear.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of and I've heard the same thing in the model railroading hobby, which is one of those hobbies I'd love to get into if I had the time and the money and all that sort of stuff. But it's essentially the same thing. The NMRA has had some challenges dealing with millennials and that, saying, hey, we want to be. We want to change the hobby in this way, and they weren't being acknowledged. So there was there was a lot of toing and throwing and fretting, and looks like they're finally getting it too. And I think we do. I think for both IPMS worldwide, both Canada and the U.S. and us in general, there is a lot of technique, a lot of talent. And as you say, you had your article on decaling. I look at one of your other ones. A technique I'm very familiar with, but doing the paint chipping with the Prismacolor pencils. Like, it's something I already know, but it's great to see a technique, and that's exactly what young modelers want to know, no matter what they do. It doesn't matter whether it's a Gundam, a ship, or a plane, or all that. So I think it's an important thing. And again, with the technology these days, if they're not going to get it from their local group, they can very easily go somewhere else to get it. And
Yeah.
for these existing, and I say this with the industry, the stores, whoever, you have to move with the time. You can still embrace the old stuff. There's nothing wrong in embracing the guy that still likes to build the Airfix, the monogram. He's enjoying that, but you also have to embrace the new techniques and learn. Some of the best lessons I've learned are from some of the younger guys, particularly when they're doing the car stuff and the Gundam stuff. Yeah, because that's two areas I just haven't done a lot of. So it's fascinating to see where things are going. So yeah, I'm pleased. Hopefully it seems to be a lot of folks like us who are finally realizing, and I think it's slowly changing. And you hate to say it's gonna take the current generation to kick off, but it will change at some point. People saying, I really get tired of people saying, oh, the hobby's dying. It's not. It's evolving.
It's evolving. That's the key. That is the key.
I look at all these, I'm involved with a lot of discussion boards over in England because that's where I was originally from. And there is so many cottage industries over there setting up. Many people building all different things. You look at, some of the stuff, like they had a recent show in Vienna. That's mostly figures, but it's a huge industry show and thousands of stuff on the tables. It's just, we're going to have a link to it on the show. It's amazing.
Yeah, you touch on something that was just crossing my mind. I actually made myself a note to mention this. One of the things as I've explored Gundam and 40K and sci-fi and Maschinen Krieger and all of these things, I had always taken, and I say it somewhat shamefully now, I had always taken a fairly dim view of a lot of those genres before, because I thought, to be a serious modeler, it's got to be, it's got to be an aircraft, it's got to be a tank or something like that. And as I started exploring these other genres, I was floored with the level of talent that is present in those.
Yes.
And the difference in techniques and all of these things that I'm going, wait, I've never heard of any of this. And it's been really eye-opening the last year to see, okay, here's entire new methods of weathering and painting and doing things that in my arrogance I had never known about.
Yep.
And frankly, in terms of sheer numbers, when you start talking about what we in the West refer to as the East, the sheer numbers of modelers and the things that are going on probably dwarfs what happens in North America and Europe.
Very much so.
And it's just impressive. And I look at it. I remember one time looking at this diorama that I can't remember the guy's name, but it was a diorama of two Gundam models. If you know what they are, it was an RX-78-2 and a Zaku 2 fighting.
Okay.
And the RX-78-2 was falling back into a building, and the other one was jumping off the top of a building, coming down on it.
I think I've seen that one, yeah.
And
okay, I know
it was so dramatic.
Yes.
And it was so well executed, and I'm looking at it, and I'm very much from the artistic camp of modeling. Right. I like the emotional feeling that I get from looking at models. It actually, this sounds crazy to say from an ex-paratrooper, but it actually gave me tears in my eyes looking at it because it was so well done. It was so well executed. There was so much emotion in it.
Right.
And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, how have I gone the last decade and completely ignored this? So it's really been fun to explore this whole new area.
And I've done a similar journey. I always remember for myself, it likens me back to when I was in my teens, and you'd get the Matchbox catalog, the Monogram, the Revell catalog, and then the odd time, your store would manage to get in a supply of the Tamiya catalogs. And those Tamiya catalogs from the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s with all the dioramas, it just blew my mind to see the techniques and stuff that people could do. It's been very similar for me. We have a fellow member of the club, and he was a guest on my previous episode, Anthony Goodman. He builds a lot of Gundams, and some of the stuff he does, it's just amazing. I've actually got to get one. I've got one in the stash, but it was mostly built. But at some point, I'm going to get another one. But for example, I like the idea of doing the what ifs. I've got this idea with this smaller Gundam, and I don't remember the name of it right now, sadly, but it's a smaller one. But I'm gonna match it up with some old Airfix 72nd scale armor, and do like a
Yeah.
what if, there. It's just, again, you don't worry about it. You just paint it the way you want, and away you go. And you shouldn't say you're crazy coming from an ex-paratrooper, because you guys are crazy anyway. Why would you jump out of a perfectly functioning airplane?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Exactly. So that's what we say. All right, we're going to kind of wrap this up, because it's been absolutely awesome, and we hope to have you back one day as well. I want to get you on as a guest host sometime, where you
I'd
can
love to do it.
where you can kibitz and put your 5 eggs in wherever you want. So I always ask this of my guests. You've pretty well described it already, because you blog about it all the time. What's on your bench currently?
Oh, wow. Okay. Because I blog 3 days a week, and it's different projects, I have a lot of stuff going on, and I knew you were going to ask, so I have my list together.
Okay.
Right now, I'm working on a Hasegawa Ultraman Jet VTOL, a Viper Mark II from the newer iteration of Battlestar Galactica, a Machining Krieger New Rally Pawn, an Eschi MB-326 jet fighter. I'm just starting a Bulletin Paul Defiant from Airfix. I'm working on a couple of Gundam, a Gundam Mark III and a Black Lightning Gundam, a 40K Stormhawk.
I like that one in particular. I've been enjoying that one. Yeah, that series.
It's a fun kit. I've got a 32nd scale F4G in the works, a 148 scale F105, and a Tamiya M41 Walker Bulldog, which
Excellent.
I've got to start weathering.
So that answers the question if you only work on 1 or 2 projects at a time.
Yeah. Well, because of the pace at which I publish, I have to keep a lot of them going. I just when I flat coat this Stormhawk this afternoon, that'll be my 35th completed model for the year. Wow. So I build quite a bit.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, any other websites or YouTube channels that you tend to recommend or go to, or you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, there's a few. I mean, certainly, just if you're looking for techniques, if you're looking for how to do things or about a model, just go to YouTube. The amount of content out there is tremendous. 2 that I've found very helpful for me in, I guess you'd say, my exploring my new genres. One is, I've already mentioned, the Model Making Guru, just a real fun YouTube channel to watch. He's a great guy, great to watch that. And then there's another channel called Paint on Plastic. Fellow's name is Lincoln Wright. He lives in Australia. For many years, he worked in Japan as a studio modeler there on the Machining Krieger.
I've seen his videos. Yeah, I've seen his videos. Yeah.
I'm trying to do a Machining Krieger kit, and I watch his videos, and then I go work on it again, and I'm like, why am I even bothered? I mean, he's tremendous, but he brings a lot of warmth and humor to his videos, and I could watch those 2 guys. I could watch all day. Certainly, there's others, but those tend to be ones that I watch a lot. But yeah, the amount of good content is now. There's a whole lot of good content. There's a whole lot of bad content.
Right.
So,
but we are blessed with the content we have these days.
There's so much to look at. So just go and look.
Go look and enjoy it. So, okay. Well, Jon, we really appreciate you coming on the show today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. As I said, we talk about great minds think alike. There are a lot of similarities, and that's what first struck me when I first discovered your site, and I started going through some of it. And I knew I wanted to get you on once I started up the podcast. So as I said, to my listeners, anything Jon's been talking about, we're going to have links up here. Jon, I'm going to ask you to send me that list of what you've got on the bench.
Okay, I'll do it.
It'll be easier. Yeah, it'll be easier to write it down quickly. Like I said, I have enough trouble keeping 2 or 3 on the bench at a time. So, but again, different strokes for different folks, whatever works. So thank you again, and we'll hope to have you on another time.
I would look forward to it, and thank you for having me.
All right. Wasn't that a great interview we had with Jon? Really good guy. Really glad I had the opportunity to talk to him as we covered some topics that was also near and dear to my heart. Moving on, what's on the bench? So for me, I've still got the Tamiya 135th scale Panther. I haven't done anything with it. I got to start some weathering on it. The Hasegawa 172nd scale F-18 Hornet. I've started that. I've got a build post up at blackfire.ca. Not a bad little kit. So far, so good. Actually got the top and bottom of the fuselage done. I do have to post an update to that, but that's moving along nicely. Okay, a couple of sites and tips. One is from Jon's site, painting exhausts, a quick and easy method. So for those of you that have to paint World War II propeller engine exhausts, it's a quick and easy method he mentions here. There's also a model fair in the annual Austrian Model Fair in Vienna, Austria, this last weekend, and some very good things up on there. Well worth a look. See the various pictures. A Flickr user, Martin, has provided those, so do check those out. Well worth looking at. So that's it for this episode. So don't forget to subscribe. Let us know if you have any comments or suggestions at scalemodelpodcast@gmail.com. The Scale Model Podcast, we're recording roughly bi-weekly and is available where all your favorite podcasts are found, including iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. And if you could please, when you subscribe, give a rating once you've listened to an episode, and let other people know. When you give a rating, it does tend to move the page further up the ranks, shall we say, so more people are aware of it. We really appreciate that. Also, we've got a Facebook page at facebook.com Scale Model Podcast, and we've also got a YouTube page, and I'll put the links for those and everything else in the show notes. So thank you once again for joining me. We'll see you next time. This is Stuart Clark for the Scale Model Podcast. Thank you, and be well.